Homeworld Deserts of Kharak, the prequel to Homeworld 1. Is it worth spending your money on this game? Well, the answer to that question is a strong and firm no. It's $50 or 46 euros, which is way too fucking much for what this game has to offer. It's not that the game is horrible in itself, it's not that it's broken or beyond any redemption, it's just that it's too damn expensive for the content that it has on offer. So let's take a look at that. You've got a bare bones multiplayer mode with only a couple of maps and a few modes and none of the social functions that other games have, or a map maker. Do you know why Blizzard games are so popular in terms of online playing? They're strategy games, you know, beyond World of Warcraft or anything like that. The reason Blizzard still has some of the most popular strategy games, and they have a more active multiplayer community than many other strategy games combined, like let's look at Grey Goo, Active Aggression, recent real-time strategy games, and Homeworld Deserts of Kharak. Blizzard has a more active community in Warcraft 3 than those three games have combined. And it's not just because Blizzard is a big company, it's because Blizzard knows what the fuck they're doing. The social functions, the clans, and most importantly, the map maker. All of which are fucking absent or are far worse done in this game and in Active Aggression and in Grey Goo than in Warcraft 3, a game that's over a decade and a half old. You'd think that people would be able to match a game that's that old. Now granted, there's been a lot of patches in Warcraft 3, but those things that I mentioned, social functions and map makers, were there from day one. And that's why Blizzard is so successful compared to this. So multiplayer and skirmish, not much to offer there compared to other games. And really, if you're gonna spend that much money for a multiplayer mode, then there are other games that are better. You can spend 40 euros to get Legacy of the Void, which is a far better game, and you have the map maker, you have a far more active community, and you have a developer that's gonna put a lot more patches for that game and do a better job in terms of design and balance. You know, obviously Blizzard being a big company plays a role in this, but they've been doing this even since before they were a big company, ever since before World of Warcraft. You know, since Warcraft 2, they've had map makers in their fucking games. So that's something that needs to be kept into consideration. And that's actually an important part about having an active community, because there's a lot of people who only play custom maps in a game like Warcraft 3. And because this game doesn't have one, that's obviously gonna attract less people. Hell, there's been an entire genre of games which is very damn popular, created through the custom map system of Warcraft 3. MOBAs! Started in, actually, StarCraft 1. Then got more developed in Warcraft 3, then became their own genre after that. Yeah, that's a thing. That's a reality of the situation there. And then there's the campaign. Beyond performance issues on a technical level, there's some performance issues I found in certain missions in the campaign. The fact you can't rebind your keys, all of that. The campaign leaves quite a bit to be desired. For starters, it's not that long. It took me about 7 hours, give or take, and that's with the reloading being taken into account that I probably didn't show in my playthrough all that much. The failures of certain missions, not that many failures though, but yeah, about 7 hours give or take for me to actually finish this game on the highest difficulty. For other people, it's a dozen hours. Now granted, I'm someone who plays something like StarCraft 2 and Platinum level, so for me, you know, it wasn't that big of a challenge. But much of the time, actually, of those 7 hours, actually wasn't necessarily dealing with enemies, because you have persistent armies in this game. You don't start from zero. You have persistent armies. You gather resources from one map and continue on with them in the next mission. Though there's some issues with that, in the sense that if you're building a unit just before the mission ends, then those resources are going to be lost, and you're not going to get that unit. Same with upgrades, etc. But the way you're going to end up playing, because of the persistent army, the persistent upgrades on your army, and the resources, is you're going to try and get as much resources from the map, at least in the early missions, and you're going to scour the map for artifacts and to improve your army, to improve your carrier. And that obviously will slow you down. And it's not that interesting. In fact, it reminds me of Battle for Middle-earth 1, which is a fine game in itself, but that's one of the boring aspects of that game, in that you're spending so much time just going from mission to mission, killing everyone on the map, leveling all your units, getting all your units upgraded, and that's just a huge time sink, and it happens here as well. If not for that, the missions would take me considerably less. Obviously, some of them would be more challenging, but still, I think I could have managed otherwise. I just ended up having steamrollers and not really having a challenge and playing it very slow, very cautiously for the most part, and you know, taking my time to advance, trying to not lose many units, and so I ended the campaign and, you know, on classic in 7 hours. Could have done it faster, could have done it slower. You know, depends on your playstyle, your skill level, and all of that, and other factors as well. But the missions themselves are not that well designed. The enemy opposition is not going to be that great. The AI is not that great either. You know, something Blizzard managed well in their games, even though they have horrific AI themselves, but they managed to make missions entertaining. The AI in itself doesn't matter if you can make the game entertaining. There's never going to be a game where the AI is going to match a even decently competent human player. That's just not going to happen, unless you give it huge economic bonuses. In this game, the AI has economic bonuses. On top of that, it can spawn units out of its ass in certain missions. Not all of them. There's a decent number of missions where the units are produced by enemy carriers or production cruisers. That's fine. But then there's missions, especially later on, you know, beyond defense missions, where the AI is getting units off the map. But there's missions later on, especially the last 2 missions, where the AI is getting units out of its ass. And that's really annoying, because you're dealing with hordes of enemies that the AI is getting for free, whereas you have to harvest resources, you have to maintain your units. So you end up playing very defensively, but at the same time, it's not just purely defense. You know, when Blizzard does that, for instance, in Legacy of the Void, generally it's in defense missions, you know, except specific situations inside the mission, but more often than not, when they're throwing hordes of enemies at you on a consistent basis, which the enemy doesn't have to train, you know, forget the free resources, the AI has free resources here as well, but generally when they're just spawning units off the map to throw at you, it's in defense missions. Here, you have to be proactive, you have to attack an enemy carrier and destroy an enemy carrier, you have to do some other objective, you can't just sit on your ass and defend an objective. Amusingly, the defense missions are not that difficult in this game. They don't have a lot to offer, they're quite easy to deal with, whereas the harder missions are where you are dealing with hordes of enemies and having to destroy an enemy carrier. But even then, they're not that difficult themselves. It's just frustrating to deal with such a system, and shows the lack of imagination by the developers as far as I'm concerned. At the end of the day, is it worth paying $50 or 46 euros or whatever your regional equivalent is for a game that takes 7 hours to beat on the highest difficulty and has only 12 missions? There's 13 in theory, but one of those 13 is just a tutorial mission where you're just moving units around and shooting drones and all that, not a proper mission. There's only 12 real missions, and you can finish them even less than that. And there's people who have beaten the game in 5 hours. I did it 7 hours, highest difficulty. I have an entire playthrough to prove that. And it wasn't bad, you know. Complaints aside, it wasn't I didn't feel frustrated necessarily or pissed off for most of that. Sure, I kind of got bored by the fact that it's the kind of game that requires you or rewards you if you take all the time to get all the resources on the map and all of that, but I wasn't really frustrated with that. You know, I could have played and just rushed for it. That was my choice. Of course, you know, it's just better if you take your time, but still. But at the same time, I can't help but think, it's like, really, $50 for this? I'm sorry, it's really, really not worth it. I guess the one thing I can say in Homeworld's favor is that it's the best real-time strategy game that's come out from a smaller developer. That's not saying much, because the only competition is are Active Aggression and Grey Goo, which were quite frankly horrific on a single-player level and not good at all on a multiplayer skirmish level. So it's better than that, but it's too damned expensive. So don't buy it at full price. you're wasting your money. Unless you really, really like Homeworld and you need to get your fix, in which case I'd recommend you get it from Grey Market, like Kingwin or G2A or whatever site. Then really, just don't bother. Wait for a major discount. It'd probably be worth it at $15, $20, something like that. But not $50, 50 euros. And they probably knew this themselves. Why? Because they are willing to offer people the Homeworld remastered versions if you pre-ordered the game. And those are about 36 euros or $36, give or take. So, you know, if you pre-ordered this game and got those, then that might have been worth it, but it's really not worth this much money for this. So, just something to take into consideration. Costin here on Serious Gaming, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Thank you all for watching, and stay tuned for more.